It's a great honor to be here. Say a few words about Joe LeDoux, who's been a colleague and a friend of mine for roughly 10 years now. I first met Joe back when I was a newly minted PhD, just finished my PhD in philosophy of cognitive science in New York City. And I was a bit of a musician and would organize some jam sessions between graduate students and people in the area. And of course, I heard about Joe's band, the Amygdaloids, and so eventually I figured there was enough of us to try to get a group of um, bands together to put on a kind of musical festival that I called the Qualia Fest. And Joe was immediately involved from the get-go of that. So that started in 2010. We played at the Parkside Lounge again in 2011 to Local 269, and then the Bowery Electric in 2012. And that one was actually written about by the New York Times. So that was great fun. And Joe was a great supporter of all the bands and the musical scene in general, and so that was a lot of fun. But we didn't really talk about our work. We talked mostly about music, and of course that all changed. I think in maybe 2014, when Joe was writing Anxious, and he would email me asking me questions about a paper that I had worked with Haquan Lau, and about the higher order theory, which is what my own work focuses on. And so what kind of became clear in our discussion was that we kind of agreed. We both had interest in the emotions and consciousness, and it seemed like there were these two different discussions going on in these fields. But the debates were eerily similar and needed to complement each other. So on the one hand, you have something like a higher order versus a first order debate in consciousness research and also in emotion research. And of course, higher order theories claim that consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, there being something that it's like for you to have an experience, depends on one being aware of oneself as having certain mental states and various goings on in one's life. So it's not just enough to represent what's going on in the world, you also have to somehow represent that you're undergoing it, so that there's this kind of inner awareness that's involved. And you find a debate like that occurring in the emotions literature, but they don't connect it to the debate that's going on in the consciousness research. On the other hand, in consciousness research, we find people talking a lot about experiences of tomatoes and uh, pain and so forth, but no real discussion about emotions or the things, the aspects of our conscious life which are most distinctive of human experience. And so we thought that these two conversations need to be joined, and we try to do that. And then in addition to just trying to get the conversation started, we offered a kind of modified higher order approach to emotional consciousness. And this really came out of reading Joe's chapters. And in November of 2015, he came to give a talk at the CUNY Graduate Center, and he was brave enough to come out afterwards and jam with us in a local rehearsal studio, being only the third person ever at CUNY to do that. The second one being myself and another person named Benji Kazak. And so it was after that we started writing our paper, which became the 2017 PNA essay paper. And what came out of that discussion was an idea that I thought was really interesting and worth working on, which was that instead of thinking of the states which we become aware of as states, say in V4 for color, or in secondary sensory cortices for certain kinds of sensory experiences, these states might themselves be in the frontal cortex, and so they might be anatomically higher order in that sense, not in the sensory cortices where lots of theories, I think. So for instance, Jesse Prinz and Ned Block and all these guys, whether they're higher order or first order, there's I think a kind of consensus that the place where we'd find the states that we would want to call first order states, or as Joe and I sometimes call them, lower order states, where we would find them is in these secondary cortical areas. And our proposal, really building off Joe's idea, was that, well, these things may be found in the prefrontal cortex themselves. So they may be higher order states in that sense, but need to be re-represented in order to be consciously experienced. And so that, I think, was an interesting idea, which is still being developed. And of course, since then, we have gone on to have many adventures together. And so it's a great great honor to be a part of Joe's intellectual life and to have these discussions with him. I've learned so much from working with him. And so I just want to say thank you, Joe.